that persons diagnosed with mental illness are actually far more likely to be the victims of violence, not the perpetrators of violence, and that they're far more likely, if they're involved in a violent act, to be shot by someone else rather than to be the shooters. And so we dealt with the complicated reasons of why was it? Why was it that the reality of what's happening in the United States is turned on its head in the aftermath of these, again, horrific mass shootings? We average about 32,000 shootings a year in this country on average over the last 15, 20 years. And this is everything from homicides to suicides to assaults. And what we found was that there were a number of factors that are far more likely to be associated with shootings than our mental illness. Substance use at the time of an emotionally charged conflict is very indicative. The presence of a firearm, of course, in cases of suicide, increases the risk of a fatal suicide. A past history of violence is a much greater indicator than is mental illness for violence. And the one we found the most interesting was actually knowing someone is a risk factor, in that about 85% of shootings in this country happen within social networks. So you're far more likely to be shot by your neighbor or your cousin or your disgruntled brother-in-law or something like that than you are by some crazed stranger. I'm not saying in any way that people shouldn't have guns. I think that there's a constitutional right to bear arms. But I would say that the rhetoric whereby people are accumulating guns in the present day has a lot to do with this fear of the unknown stranger. Somebody could come attack us, we need to protect ourselves. And I think that the gun discourse perpetuates some crazy person is going to come shoot you. But if you actually look at the research, it's not the crazy person necessarily that you have to fear. You're far more likely to be shot by somebody you know. We should set our gun policies based on the everyday shootings, not on the sensational shootings, because there, I believe, we'll get far more traction in preventing gun crime. The mentally ill across the board are about 60 to 120% more likely than the average person to be the victims of violent crime, not the perpetrators of violent crime. And of course that makes sense when you think that people with mental illness, especially severe mental illness, often they're homeless or they're talking to themselves or they appear odd in a certain kind of way. They become targets. Our argument in the paper in part is that we need to pay much more attention to mental health systems. How do people get care? Do they have health insurance? Is there follow-up? Is there medication available to them? Other issues like that. So in a way, it was a failure of the system often that just became represented as a failure of the individual.